right, I'm here to introduce you to our sponsor for this session, Allrecipes. They are our presenting title sponsor, and we just love them, as I'm sure you guys already know. They are incredible. You can see their logo on all of our backgrounds. They have an amazing All-Stars program, and they just have so much more to tell you about. So we're going to go ahead and share a little more now.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for having us here.
Oh, Nichole, do you want us to play that video real quick?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. We're gonna play a video, and then I have a little introduction about you two as well.
Perfect.
And then
Wonderful.
I'll turn it over to you. So sorry, I should have said something.
That's okay.
Already know that Allrecipes is the world's largest community-driven food brand, providing trusted content to more than 60 million home cooks. We publish recipes, how-tos, and stories from cooks around the world who connect and inspire one another with the photos, videos, and reviews that they share.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my kitchen. Lauren Magenta here. Today, we are making one of my absolute favorite budget-friendly meals. This is a go-to in my house. It's oven-fried chicken thighs.
The heart of Allrecipes is home cooks like you, content creators and people who are passionate about sharing great food and the stories and techniques behind the dishes they love.
When I was a young mom, I wanted to come up with a recipe that kind of brought together that family, homey feel, but also added a little bit of my own flair. Hey there, my name is Angela Sackett. I'm a wife and mom of 5 plus 2 daughters-in-law, and I live on the Jersey Shore.
The Allrecipes All-Stars are a select group of cooks from the Allrecipes community. The All-Stars love to cook and share their recipes, post photos, rate and review other cooks' recipes, give cooking advice, and win monthly prizes in campaigns and contests. The All-Stars also act as brand ambassadors, representing Allrecipes in sponsored and PR opportunities.
There are certain foods that just take you back to so many family and childhood and holiday memories. I'm Puerto Rican, and whenever anybody was over, or anytime we were making a big Puerto Rican meal, my dad would make tostones for us.
We feature All-Stars in profiles, videos, and Allrecipes magazine. And we share All-Star content with our social media audience of more than 5 million followers. All-Star photos and recipes fill our articles, recipe galleries, and recipe hubs. We're recruiting for more All-Stars right now, and we'd love to talk with you about joining the All-Star team. Let us know if you want to become part of the Allrecipes community too. Happy cooking!
We are excited to introduce you to the editor-in-chief of the Allrecipes magazine, Nichole Aksamit, and senior editor for allrecipes.com, Kimberly Holland. Together, they will be sharing their specialized expertise in trend spotting and content planning for high-quality content, so you can plan and prepare content like editorial pros. Welcome, ladies. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us. We're really excited to be here. I'm just going to share my screen very quickly. All right. Can everyone see that? We are glad to be here. We're just going to let you know that we are going to be taking questions kind of as we go. So we'd encourage you to put your questions in the chat, and Candace is going to help us sort of surface them, since it's sometimes hard to look at 3 screens at once. But do ask your questions as we go, and we're going to leave some time at the end for more questions. As Abby said, I am the editor-in-chief of Allrecipes magazine. I've been with the magazine for about 8 years and only recently became the editor-in-chief. And I'm excited to be here with Kimberly Holland, our senior editor from allrecipes.com on the digital side. We're going to try and give you some perspectives from both ends of that spectrum, and talk a little bit about how to spot, surf, and set trends while planning your very best content. So first up, I just wanted to share that I think there are a couple of terms to know: trend setting versus trend spotting versus trend surfing. And it's kind of always good to know which you're doing. Sometimes you're not even sure. But for the magazine, I'll say it's often a mix. Would you say that's true too for you, Kimberly?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we're always working with evergreen, which is, feels like you're writing all kinds of trends. And then we're always looking at things that pop up, which is the setting and spotting. So yeah, always.
Yeah, I would say for us, often it is that kind of blend. We always have seasonal flavors and feelings because the magazine is every 2 months. So we try to be in step with the season when it publishes. We do always rely on some evergreen and perennial favorites, especially if there's a twist that taps an emerging trend. And then we also lean a little forward because we're working so far ahead. We're usually working 6 to 9 months ahead of when the issue actually arrives on doorsteps. And so we really have to lean a little forward into trends. Sometimes we're a little ahead of the trend just to be on time. And sometimes we're guessing into the future that maybe this could spark a trend for someone. And the advanced nature of our work does mean that we're going to miss some short-term trends, and that's okay. What about for you, Kimberly? How are you thinking about the way that you approach trends?
Yeah, so similar. I mean, we definitely have the long-term planning eye, which is to say, like we're in the middle of planning for Thanksgiving right now, because there's always going to be the sort of evergreen constant need for certain holiday content. So here, we've just finished Easter, so we're going to look at a couple of Easter pieces. But here, Easter brunch is always going to be big. So that's a piece that in the long term, you're looking at it as something that will always happen. What's the spin on it? What's the, what might be new about it this year or next season, or however you're looking at what the event you're planning for. For us this year, it's a little bit different from the year before, a little bit different from the year before that. But we're always trying to put out the content a couple of months ahead that just builds that foundation, which I'll talk a little bit about as we go along, but just builds that foundation of content so that when we are working on faster trends, more current trends, we've always got something in our back pocket as part of our content mix.
Right. And so the example you have up here is about Easter, obviously. That's kind of something that you worked on well ahead of Easter, obviously.
Yeah, this was probably done in November, December.
Okay.
Does it have a date? It says March 2020, but I promise it's been updated since then. But these are updated several months before. That just helps us also be ready for Easter, so that we know that when, if something comes up as we get closer to the holiday, whatever holiday it is, we know we've got that content there. So we're always ready.
Wonderful. And then you talked a little bit about medium term, like the sheet pan Easter dinner.
Yeah, so this one actually came out of a discussion with another senior editor, Darcy Lenz, so she helps manage kind of the recipes we're putting through to our test kitchen, which we pull so many of our recipes from the audience as well as the all-stars. But sometimes we come up with our own based on something we're seeing and we're not sure what it's going to be. And in this case, this was kind of born out of how well a bunch of content did last year for us around Easter and around small gatherings at Easter. And so when we were talking about it, I was like, could you do an entire Easter dinner on a sheet pan? Which sounds crazy, but absolutely. And so that was kind of that medium term response. It was something we saw a couple of months back. It obviously takes a little bit of planning to get this kind of recipe created and photographed and on the site, but it's one that we saw coming, again, because of the sort of influx situation we are in with the pandemic. So we knew that there were going to be some people who were still in these small gatherings. And so we wanted to kind of respond to what we saw as a trend for smaller gatherings with this recipe.
Right. And you also had this great example about Green Giant and Peeps. Could you share a little about that?
Yeah, so when you've built that foundation, when you have that great content, that long-term content that's working its way underneath for you, that's kind of bubbling along for you, you get a little freedom to do these fun pieces, these what we're calling responsive pieces. And in this case, it happened to be an April Fool's joke, but it did extremely well for us. I think even some brands syndicated it and shared it, and it did extremely well for them. But it lets you have that freedom to play around with something that's kind of funny and unique. And in this case, I don't think it's going to be a trend. I hope we don't have any more fake cauliflower bunnies. But it lets you ride that sort of fun moment when you've built that great foundation of content underneath it, and you don't feel so rushed to respond to everything. You can kind of pick and choose what you want to hit.
Right, right. Well, you mentioned that you ride the moment, and I think it's sort of helpful when you're thinking about trends to have a metaphor. I always like to have a couple of them in my back pocket, and it's good to know that all trends are not created equal. They often have very different lifespans, and a couple of ways that I like to think about it are fire. So the idea of a momentary flash, something that's really short-lived, but it's interesting because the sky is dark and people are looking up. So it has a lot to do with the timing, and also maybe because there's not a whole lot else going on. But a firework, a flash in the sky, is not going to become a big fire unless there's lots of combustible matter hanging around to catch fire and a lot of oxygen to feed it. And so I think when you are trying to understand if a trend is worth continuing, like, okay, I see this happening now, should I build on that? I think you need to look for those underlying, the combustible matter. So those underlying macro and micro trends that feed that idea. And if there's something else that's kind of sparking people's interest besides just the moment of dark sky and boredom that we're looking at. So I also think you mentioned riding a trend, which is a good segue into the idea of an ocean metaphor. And I think water comes into play a lot here too, but that idea of there are undercurrents of trends that are kind of percolating for a long time. There are seasonal rhythms and cycles, that some things are always going to feel more relevant in the spring or the summer or the fall. And then there are also those wild cards that might disrupt or cause the wave of a trend to spike. So the weather, when we're talking about oceans and jet skis, someone just whizzing by. So the idea of catching and surfing a wave or making a wave is also sort of a helpful way of thinking about it. If there's a lot of momentum under a trend, then you can kind of feel like it might live a little longer, and you can ride that wave and turn it into the next one. So for Allrecipes, the magazine, we're often really thinking about seasonal sensibility and mood, what you're hungry for and when, and we're really thinking about next year this time. So I am thinking about next Easter based on this is Easter and Easter's past and how I feel in the moment, what I'm seeing in the marketplace. And I think that's important for you to do as you're planning anything, that kind of year ahead perspective, but being in the moment of what do I feel like now does inform next year and should inform next year. Obviously, COVID has messed with that a little bit this past year, a lot of it this past year, but that idea of when we were looking at planning for this past Thanksgiving previous, COVID hadn't happened yet. And when we were really working on it in spring and summer, we didn't know, were we going to be able to gather for Thanksgiving? Were people going to really want different things? So we kind of had to lean into what we did know and kind of what people were thinking and feeling at Easter time. That played into it for sure. And where we landed was this idea of United We Eat. We weren't sure if people were going to get together or not. They might still share some stuff across the miles. They might be calling grandma for that favorite pie recipe that they now have to figure out how to make. They might be making a smaller turkey or no turkey at all. All the rules might change, but the idea was that all these flavors people were hungry for those flavors, and they might just do it a slightly different way. So that's kind of our cover for that issue ended up being a little bit, more of a hopeful ode to Thanksgiving in the year of Zoom, but it was a little harder to predict than usual last year. And we're still figuring out exactly how we're gonna cast this year's Thanksgiving. We're very hopeful, but it is one of those things where you kind of have to read the tea leaves and also make a little bit of a gamble forward on where we're going to be 6 months from now. you want to talk a little bit, Kimberly, about kind of the digital response to all those sort of evolution of feelings and moments within COVID?
Yeah, so, where the magazine has time to really, I don't want to say process it, because obviously the timeline is very fast, even when it's so far out, but where you have time to really be thoughtful about it. I felt, especially with the kind of content we've been putting out over the last year, that it's been an in the trenches moment for us. So, not only were we trying to figure out how people were responding to these large moments, to these holidays, were they going anywhere for Thanksgiving? Were they not? Were they staying at home? Were they cooking a turkey? We had all of these questions about our own audience, but based on our own experiences, of course. But what we were also seeing in terms of what people were creating. And at the same time, when we're trying to figure out how to respond to these large moments, these holiday gatherings, these special moments, we're just trying to help people get through the day to day. And so for us, we saw a lot of content growth, obviously with new cooks, meaning people who had never had to stay at home and cook, were suddenly trying to figure out how to turn on their stove. And so, we had a lot of really good success with beginner cooks. But I think where we were able to speak as where we were really able, I don't want to call it a trend, because nobody likes the idea of a trend in a pandemic, but one of the things that became a theme for us, it was helping people find ground in what was happening. So in this case, it was, survival, for lack of a better word. And so the content we decided to put out around that, and in the initial stages of the pandemic and in the early days, you can see this is March 12th. I think the next day is when our company said, "You're staying home." This was, what do you even buy? What does it even mean to create a stockpile, or to be prepared to stay at home for a month and not cook and not go to the grocery store, and so that's where we were able to kind of find a helpful spot for who we are and what we do and what we have. So that was an initial step for us, was how do you take care of yourself and how do you find yourself in this moment?
Right. I like that kind of. And there were those sort of waves where I think people sort of really dug into comfort food early. There was that sense of, how do I just survive? And then also that idea of like no rules. Even Easter last year, there were a lot of people who, like, we noticed afterward that a lot of the searches were for pie and for turkey, like things that you might not normally associate with Easter, were really popular at Easter. It was sort of like, it was a little bit of that, I'm not sure what to, maybe I don't like ham as much as I thought I did, but it was also that sense of rule breaking, that if no one else is coming, then I can cook what I want. And maybe the thing I really want is turkey, or the thing I really don't want is ham.
There's, the second item on this list is comfort food. And that was obviously one of those when, our social editors would say, they're really still into potatoes and it's July. And you're like, potato salad, and they're like, no, like creamy, cheesy potatoes. And you're like, okay, we're here, we're going to go with this. And I think a little bit of that is obviously, you hope that these pandemic lessons or these trends from the pandemic don't carry, that we don't have to deal with this much longer. But I think it reaches to a point that when times are hard, people are looking for something to center themselves and to feel connected wherever they can. And even to your point, like, I was by myself last Easter and I was by myself this Easter, and I was like, what do I want to eat? And this year it was prime rib, and that's what I had, but last year it was something simple because I was feeling exhausted. And I think that's also true a little bit of what we saw in our audience. Last year it was a little bit of survival, a little bit of, okay, this is the first holiday where things are different. Even, the content we had around Passover was, how do I have a Passover feast when I'm not with my family? What does that even look like? And that actually, gets to this point that's on the screen now, which is our audience at its core is a very caring and empathetic audience, especially when it comes to their friends and family. And so we had a lot of success talking to them about how to care for other people. This story was about bringing food to someone in quarantine, read this first. And it was very nuts and bolts how to do it safely, of course. The writer did a good job of explaining what you should and shouldn't do. But at its core, it was helping people do what they've always wanted to do, which is to care for people. And I think we know, if you're going back to the idea of trends, for us, our audience is always looking for that. So even at holidays, every holiday last year, it was how to make a meal for someone and leave it at their front door, or the best way to share your meal with neighbors and that sort of thing. And you know what your voice is, and you know what your audience is, and that sort of trend you see, if it's, helping your neighbors grocery shop, if you have elderly neighbors, like you can talk to that if that's your experience, and that's what you're trying to put into the world. And so that for us was a really important tent pole in who we wanted to be in that moment.
Right. I think you guys were onto that a little earlier than we were, and we were trying to find a way to do that in the magazine too. And it kind of, for us, it came up in our February, March issue, which was the story that you see right there, or a snippet of the story, called Love Squared, which was the idea of taking everyone's favorite 9x13 recipe and splitting it among 2 square dishes, one for you to keep and one to give. And it kind of tied into a couple of trends. For us, it was A, it's a popular cooking method, casseroles. B, we were all sort of sick of our own leftovers at this point, and we felt so cared for when someone dropped something else off for us. So that idea of really leaning into that idea of care, and also smaller batches with the same amount of effort. So the whole impetus of that was just, somehow these things add up to more than they are. Half is twice as good or more because of just that little twist of thinking. So yeah, I think that's a really important thing for our community. As you said, our audience is really interested in helping people, and that I think that thread continues in an ongoing way, but we certainly wanted to lean into that imprint too. And
I'll add one other thing here. And I think it was also that our audience was seeing a lot of need among, essential workers, people who, my dad works in a grocery store. And so how could I help my mom make sure that he was cared for? Because obviously he's not here, they live several hundred miles away. But I think that there's also that moment in your life where the people saw that moment as an opportunity to help, other than just people who were stuck at home, but people who were still working, who were still out there, who were still putting up a lot of energy. And, we also tried to speak to that, because the pandemic story wasn't the same for everybody, and hasn't been and won't be the same for everybody.
Right.
And so I think, we also saw a lot of quick cooking content do well. And that's probably because of people who were, working longer hours than usual, who just needed food on the table.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. And we did a piece in our October issue too about sort of reasons for hope in America. And that was really just leaning into asking our all-stars and others, what are you doing to help, or how have you been helped by other people, and kind of sharing that connection. And I think that's, I don't know, I don't even want to call that a trend. I hope this is all personal growth, but I see that's coming into it'll be in our fall issues this year too. The idea of the lessons that we've learned, what we're taking with us out of the pandemic. I think all of that, it's not really a trend, but it is part of that big mood, cultural shift. And I think that's another kind of wave to get on, is just to connect with your audience that way and recognize where people are. I went a little out of order, but I'm going to show you this slide too. We talked a little bit about also exploration, was one of your points, I think, Kimberly, about the idea that people were also starting to look for, at least as the pandemic has gone on, people have gotten much more inquisitive about the cuisines that they want to try and do at home. And I don't know, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, we have seen an explosion in content that's built around, like you said, trying other cuisines, or trying to make things you've only ever eaten out, or that your mother made. That's a big one for us. Things your mother and grandmother made that you've been scared to try, or you just haven't had the courage to try, or the time to try. And so we've seen, I don't even want to say a specific one because it's all been so strong, but we've even just in recent weeks, German cuisine has been tremendously big for us. But Japanese cuisine has done really well as people were trying to make these dishes at home and trying unique things they didn't have time to try before, probably.
Mhm.
It's a gift of time if you're at home, but it's also, why not try it? The restaurants are closed. So
For sure. So, and we were feeling that too. I think one of the things that I took away from that is that people weren't just looking for, another way to use harissa or something. They were actually looking for more authentic experiences because we were sort of missing that from the restaurant experiences or from getting together with our multicultural friends who do cooler things at their house than at mine. And so that idea of getting the experience of the food in addition to a great recipe was important. So we're also noticing and watching, TikTok and YouTube made stars of a lot of people in the last year. And some of those were, Mexican grandmas and grandpas, like Tito Charlie, or I'm forgetting her name, Doña Angela, from my Ranch to Your Kitchen lady who I watched all of her stuff last spring. And so I think that we were looking for that a little bit and trying to make sure that we did more than passing reference to, it's typical to do a Cinco de Mayo story in an April-May issue for us. That's not uncommon. But of course, that's not a real holiday for most people in Mexico. And it's really just a good excuse for us all to go there. So really this year we found we had a good brand connection, the former editor of Allrecipes Mexican site, and asked her to help us kind of curate a great menu and a great arrangement of wonderful dishes that all had a story and share some of that cultural context that we might miss from just getting the recipe alone all by itself. And I think that's important too, to kind of lean into, again, that sort of, yes, Mexican food's hugely popular. Yes, there's a seasonal moment for it, but there is also this like desire for some more authenticity and a little bit more than, beyond the recipes. So again, if you think about multiple trends converging, we hope that, the end result of wanting to be on trend is wanting to resonate with your reader. So we hope that the story that results from that resonates with more people. Okay. So this all leads us to the question about when do you jump or when do you bite on a trend? That's kind of a big one. And you want to talk a little bit about picking your moments, Kimberly?
Yeah, so I think I saw a quick message come up a minute ago about TikTok feta pasta. And I think that's an interesting place to start, because I think that's probably something, unless you've been under a rock for the last little bit, you've probably seen this trend, and it was one of those that when it first came out, it felt like a fire. It felt like a sparkle in the sky, and great, that's beautiful. How fun is that? And then it was everywhere. It was like a wildfire. And when we were looking at it, it was to the point of the slide, not our moment. There wasn't anything we felt like we could add. I think when you're looking at a trend, or when you're looking at something that has come up like on a TikTok, if you think I can do the yes and of improv comedy sort of mentality, if you can do that, that's the brilliant part of this sort of the nature of being able to make content. If you can say, I love this idea and this is how I'm going to do it myself, or how I'm going to improve it, or did you ever think of this, or have you ever considered that? Just for us, just repeating it or just covering it didn't feel like the right moment. And when we were talking about this, I had said, we're not, we didn't have anything. And then this week, our video team released a yes and of that, which is a 1-pan macaroni and cheese. And that's one of those things that it allowed you to take the idea. You knew the idea. We didn't have to build the work because there was so much out there about this. but we were able to find our way to talk about that and to be a part of that conversation, and something that felt a little more us, which is, I mean, mac and cheese doesn't get any more Allrecipes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and that Dalgona coffee example is a good one, because I think that also kind of came up and we weren't sure if that was going to be a very big trend or not. But when it happened, sort of in the early days of, I guess it was a little before, but anticipating the pandemic,
early, yeah.
and then a little crazy during the early days of the pandemic, because we were all kind of bored and playing around with our mixers, and whipping sugar seems like a lot of fun. So so we kind of missed that one, and I thought, oh well, maybe we're done. Like maybe it didn't really feel like super approachable for a spring or a summer issue, which would have been the soonest we could do it, knowing about it in February. And it didn't really feel super for late summer, but as we kind of got into the fall, we talked about, well, is there some way we could capitalize on that idea? We're seeing people do other spin-offs with Dalgona. Could we come up with something else that felt, fall worthy and seasonal worthy? And came up with this, basically the merger of Dalgona coffee with a pumpkin spice latte and a cocktail, because we're all drinking now. And so we got a spiked and spiced Dalgona coffee, which made its debut in the December issue, which actually hit right around Thanksgiving. So again, that question of, can you be too late? Probably not. Like there's that idea of, as long as you're putting your own little spin on it. I think one thing that we have to remember is that our audience is not a monolith, and not everybody knows about everything. Dalgona coffee is still quite new to a lot of people. And so our hope is that in the magazine, we introduced some people to the trend that they probably didn't know about. And we added a twist to the trend for people who already did know about it. And hopefully anybody who liked pumpkin spice lattes would be interested in this drink too. So there's kind of like, there's an expanding world of universe of people who are interested in the net result of that, if you can kind of, marry those trends in a way that feels right for your brand and for the moment.
Yeah. And I, the quesadilla hack is a good example here. Again, that's one of those that we covered. We didn't try and reinvent the wheel because we didn't think we could. We liked it. We loved, that concept is brilliant. I think I saw in my Apple news feed, someone had done something this morning and I was like, that's really smart. That's really, what I tell the team when we're looking over news concepts or when we're thinking about stories, it's like, you don't have to be the first if being the first is not the best product for you. If our audience, and I think in this, your own audience is better, but it's okay if you're late. It's, and I don't want to say late implies something negative, but it's okay if you come later, or in this case, if something that's big in the spring and you think, oh, it's too old by the fall, but you recreate it in such a way that calls back to what this thing they remember and probably have some connection to, because I think everybody made one of these coffees. But it allows you to pull back that, that memory and that trend, but to do it in such a way that feels better for who you are and what you're putting out into the world. And also like maybe you start another trend with it. I mean, the things that are happening on TikTok these days, I'm like, my grandmother did this. There was one person who was bragging about learning how to butter their pan with their butter paper. And I was like, I'm sorry, my 90-year-old grandmother taught me this. So it's sometimes there's nothing too old or too retro or, too overcovered, too saturated that you can't do it yourself if it's better and representative who you are.
Well, I like that idea that nothing is really new, but also I guess the flip side of that is that it's always new to someone. So yeah. I try to think about that new to me a lot when I'm planning the content for the magazine. Like there are some things that, we have a lot of very talented food people on our staff, and occasionally someone who's new to the brand, or maybe it's our intern for the summer says something and they're like, this blew my mind. And we're like,
Yeah.
really? Because you're so used to it that you kind of forgot
Yeah.
that it's still new to somebody. So I wouldn't discredit walking that ground again, because it is always new. We're all coming to this at different places and with different experiences, and cooking is so vast. I feel like I'm always learning new things, and no matter where you are on that journey, it's new to someone.
Yeah.
So yeah. Okay. Well, we haven't taken a single question. Are there questions? I'm not seeing, you guys are just chatty and having fun. I don't see a lot of questions in the questions. Let's see. Do you want to talk at all about the cocoa bomb?
Yeah.
Yeah, can
So
it be too early?
here's another one where I feel like if you didn't see this, where have you been? So, over the late 2020, cocoa bombs just took off. And, in early 2021, they tried to make tea bombs and wine bombs. And I was like, please stop with the bombs. But cocoa bombs are not new. We were not the first ones to do it, of course, and we didn't even cover it in a way that was like, look how amazing these are. It was pretty much, how do you make this? I've seen this. How do you make it? And we went really early. I mean, October 26th is pretty early for winter content. And so when we posted it, it was a little, maybe this isn't going to do anything, and that's fine. And then some sister brands came along and just blew it out of the water, and their own success with it, both like with ideas and where to buy it and how to make your own and where to buy some that are already pre-made and what to add to them, just helped ours grow tremendously. And then we, because we thought it was going to die on the vine, nobody really considered anything. And so then what we ended up doing, and I think on the next slide, is we came back to it. We thought it was done, and we came back to it after it had been up. And because we had built this foundation of content. I have written here, Google doesn't sleep. So Google is that you're building that foundation of content that you can always have in your back pocket. That's always something you can refer back to when you're doing these more trendy stories. In this case, we had put it out there so early that it actually did tremendously well for us when the trend actually picked up, because we'd put it out so early. And so, in this case, we went back to it for a video. So in this case, this is on our site, but we did a cut for Instagram, and we may have done a cut for TikTok. I'm not sure, but my analogy for the content you're building out with this sort of thing is Google is always watching. They're constantly awake. They're constantly pulling. They're constantly looking. And then you have some of your social media places like Pinterest that they get up early and they see it and they start pinning it and they start thinking, this is interesting. I'm going to come back to this. And then by the time everyone's awake and fully aware of what's happening around them, this TikTok person comes in and be like, oh my God, did you see these chocolate bombs? And they're the late ones, but they're, they're also staying up late to see the other kinds of trends that are happening, So I think this cocoa bomb was one that we thought we were going to lose. We thought we've messed this up, but we had gone out there so far in advance that we ended up building ourselves a foundation so that we could respond better when it really blew up. And it was, my cousin makes cookies for a living, and she made enough cocoa bombs over the holidays to like pay her car payment, like it was everywhere and beautiful and brilliant just to see so many different ideas.
Yeah.
And I think someone said, let's go back to the wine bombs, and those were real. You got to Google it. We didn't do it though. I feel like maybe we should have. I would have volunteered at least. There's definitely some creative and some less creative. I saw a soup bomb. But maybe that's genius. Maybe I'm the wrong person here. But yeah.
I love that. And that video, it is really like her face tells you everything. I love your analogy though, too, about the platforms. TikTok is a late sleeping teenager. I get it. I love that. Sorry, I flipped to the final slide, but we are open for questions. Are there some questions in all of the chatting? I thought someone asked about spreadsheets.
Yeah, this one by Amanda. I'll hop in really quick and moderate this for you. Amanda's just wondering, how do you guys roughly plan? Excel sheets, team meetings, what management systems, content management systems?
That's a really great question. I will say we start with essentially an Excel sheet, but we do large brainstorming meetings with our staff, and we kind of rough out the whole year, very, very high level, super rough. And then we go drill down into each issue as they approach and firm things up. And I always leave there are a couple of stories, a couple places in each issue that are sort of left for more late breaking things. They're meant to be responsive, not quite as responsive as Kimberly, but they're meant to accommodate more late breaking trends or ideas or needs. And that's one way we kind of find grace, but we sketch out for the whole issue. There are sections, and so the sections all kind of have their strengths that hit to meal planning or hit to entertaining or hit to trending and seasonality. And so all those pieces are sort of at a very high level done with brainstorming, and it comes from all of our editors. We're also, as we dig into actual recipe selection, for us, it's kind of unusual for a print magazine that we're pulling mostly our recipes are from allrecipes.com. So we sort of start with the ideas and then go back and find the recipes that we find support them. Usually we know the site pretty well, so usually we're pretty good at that. Occasionally our ideas don't pan out so well, or we'll develop into a hole if there just is something that we can't find on the site. But we really do look at the search data from a year ago very closely, and we look at trend forecasts. And in a normal year, we'd be going to trade shows and conferences and things as another way of just sort of connecting with other people and seeing what new products are coming on the market. And it's been a little harder, obviously, during a mostly virtual year, but all of that does play a role. But yeah, at a very basic level, it's a spreadsheet. It's a spreadsheet that gets more and more specific as we get closer.
Yeah, I mean, somewhere my boss is about to laugh because I'm about to praise our, we have a product called Airtable, which is basically a glorified Excel sheet. And as much as I hate it, again, they're laughing somewhere. It works really well for us. And I think if I were, working this on a smaller scale, an Excel sheet is obviously a gracious plenty for it, because in the way, while we're not working a full year out in the truest sense, I mean, we're not looking at anything past Thanksgiving at this point. There's always ideas that come up. So, for us, it's a lot of it is personally working with your own view within Airtable, which would just be a tab in Excel, and just keeping track of your ideas and then starting to plot them where they make sense. If it's something seasonal, obviously that has a place. If it's something less seasonal, you start to just fill in where it feels right for what's happening at the time. If it's meal planning, maybe that's going to be around January when everyone's trying to eat better, or maybe it's going to be around August and September when people are going back to school. If we go back to school, I don't know. I think for me, I'm overly, I have more notes on my computer than I know what to do with. So it is both a ongoing brainstorm for me, as well as when it starts to make sense in my mind as a story, then it goes into a place that's more concrete. Then it goes into a tab for, me to start plotting out and planning out. And as the larger group, it's very much that same way. I mean, we get together and have these large meetings. They're very sort of just out there at first, and then as individual editors and writers start to hone down, then the idea becomes more concrete and goes into actual planning.
Kimberly, thank you. The comments are wondering what you think are some upcoming trends, Kimberly and Nichole, for 2021 late and 2022. The golden question.
Well, so I will say the forecast is still a little hazy, but we are, reading the tea leaves like others and leaning into more hopeful, hopeful waters. The idea of connection, I think there's a very good chance that most of us are going to get together with friends and family for Thanksgiving. So we're sort of leaning into that. We think it might be the epic Thanksgiving this year because to make up for last time. Beyond that, I think just building connections with people, reintroducing ourselves to more than small bites and shared cocktails and things like that this summer. I feel like that's all happening. For early next year, it's a little hard to say if it's like true return to normal, but I'm not going to discount the learnings from the pandemic. I think people took away a lot of key things about sort of meal planning and pantry preparations, just on a basic level. People got really smart and fairly efficient at making dinner easy and effortlessly. I think people are going to dig back into their restaurants for some relief, but they're also more curious now because they've had to try to make these things at home. And so I think that I don't know, cultural exploration is going to even be more, that people will, they're like, oh yeah, I know how to do this now. And now I do have, all of the spices that I needed at home, and I have all of these ingredients. So they might want to lean more into that. I think healthfulness is kind of coming back. This was your year as a couch potato. You're probably thinking about, I know I am, about, the return to pants with zippers and having to go outside again. And that idea that, comfort food might have gotten you through, but we all, there's an underlying undercurrent of healthful eating and people wanting to be not necessarily eating for a special diet, but wanting to be well. So kind of that whole idea of wellness and wanting to eat better, more vegetables, and also just that sort of stress less balance. I think we've learned a lot about work-life balance this past year, and I think that's going to inform what comes next quite a lot. I'm not sure how much online shopping, that certainly has been part of it too. I'm personally very eager to go back to the grocery stores and like look at stuff and linger and go to my farmers markets. I miss all of that. But I do think there's some online shopping that has definitely changed the way people get, especially staple things. So what about you, Kimberly?
Yeah. So outdoor cooking. Outdoor
That
kitchen.
too, yes.
Yeah. I think, for me, I see that as a trend because you still are a little bit nervous to be inside with folks, because if you don't know their vaccine status, you don't want to be like, you can't come to my party. But outdoor dining also is just, I think that had been there before. There, outdoor pizza ovens had been really growing and then just took off.
Mhm.
And during the pandemic, and especially in the earliest months, I think that's going to continue to be big because it does allow for a sense of a little more safety in gathering. And I think that's going to help people ease back into it. Smaller gatherings, smaller backyard things.
And also, it's also a literal expansion of your kitchen. Like,
yes,
the idea of like, I need to get outside just a little more room.
And I've been in meetings with trade organizations talking about the micro spaces people are creating in their backyards because they need out of their house, but they don't want to go too far. And so the outdoor space is sort of the next level. I think end of 2021 and 2022, I think it all depends on, obviously if we can get vaccinated quickly enough, but I think there is some truth to finding what that new normal is. And I do think a little bit of that is going to be budget conscious cooking. You still have a lot of people who don't have jobs, and you still have a lot of people who didn't have jobs for a very long time. And, if that's not your audience, then that. But I think there is a lot to be said about both that people are finally wanting to spend money they've been sitting on for a long time, but also people who haven't been able to, are still needing to be aware of that.
Yeah, that's true. That's
yeah.
a really good point. I know I think we did some surveying last year, and I think it was like 86% of our audience said that it was kind of a double-edged sword. They were impacted by the pandemic, either financially or emotionally.
Mhm.
So it kind of asked both questions in one, but that idea of people really felt it. They felt it either in their pocketbooks or just on their psyche, that it was a really big change for people. And I think people have gained some efficiency. I mean, I think freezer cooking is probably going to hang on. A lot of people got freezers, big freestanding freezers or chest freezers or garage freezers for the first time last year, and figured out how to buy meat in bulk or frozen vegetables in larger scale, and figured out how to prepare meals that will keep that way. And I'm sure learned some economy from that. So I expect that will continue to, and maybe that's to your budget concerns a little bit as people get smart about that. I mean, don't tell Whole Foods, but I figured out how to get the short grain brown rice that I really love from their bulk bin online. And it's a fraction of the cost I was spending for a scoop every visit. So I think people are going to have some of that wisdom in their back pocket as they move forward.
Yeah.
Anybody else have questions? I guess we're at time.
Candace is talking, but I can't hear
You know
her.
what? I think Candace's microphone is not working, so I can hop in for her. We are done, but thank you, Kimberly and Nichole. This was incredibly insightful. It's always great to hear, from the pros. This is something you guys do all the time, just to hear your experience with trends. And it was a fun conversation again in the chat as well. So thank you. Be sure to go check out Allrecipes in the sponsor tab. Go say hi to them. And we will see you guys back at 4 o'clock. We have a 10-minute break. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.